Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere. As Liverpool move 9 points clear at the top of the Premier League after a comfortable victory over Manchester City, Anfield serenaded Pep Guardiola with a song he's not too familiar with. So after 4 league titles on the bounce, is City's title race already over? For this one, I'm joined by our Liverpool writer, James Pearce, and our Manchester City writer, Sam Lee. We're also joined by Phil Hay, who is the writer of the Athletic FC newsletter as well. James, look, you and Sam were both at Anfield on Sunday, but you must be pretty happy this Monday. I tell you, the last time we spoke about this, I said, if Liverpool end up beating Manchester City, even you have to concede that they are title favourites.
Yeah, just an absolutely remarkable week for Liverpool. I think when those 2 games against Real Madrid, the European champions, and then Manchester City, the Premier League champions, who of course have inflicted so much misery on Liverpool in this modern era, and to deal with both of them so emphatically, so impressively, 2 such dominant performances as well. It wasn't even a case of kind of riding their luck at times. They did a job on Real Madrid, and then they raised the bar even further. I thought that was the most complete performance of the on a slot era so far. And what a remarkable show of force.
Yeah, Sam, it was a really interesting dismantling of Manchester City by Liverpool. After
they're already
Manchester
dismantled,
City...
mate. That's the issue.
Yeah, well, fair enough. This was an extra dismantling.
Not saying Liverpool didn't play well, but City, they're done at this moment in time. Like, I'm sure they'll be back, but at this moment in time, well, look at them. Look, yes, like I was saying to James before the game, and anybody else I was speaking to in the press room, like, there's no way City are going to get a result here. Like, there's just no way. And I was, even if hypothetically they win, and then the gap would have been like 5 points. 5 points at this time of year is amazing. Like, it's irrelevant, basically. Like, that would be no issue. But I still see issues with City, whereby if they'd somehow won at Anfield yesterday, I don't think that would have fixed things. Guardiola said on Friday, they don't just need a result to fix things. It's more than that. That gap would have grown again in the next 3 or 4 games, which is basically only 2 weeks. They've got big issues we've talked about a lot. I've written about a lot. I've talked about on my other podcast a lot. Like, this is just where they're at. So I'm not saying for 1 second that Liverpool didn't play well, because especially that first 20 minutes was unbelievable. The atmosphere, it's one of those like Anfield days when the performance and the atmosphere is on song. The only thing that was missing was the more goals that Liverpool deserved. But at the same time, City, they're nothing like what they are normally, and what they have been for so long. As a result of several factors, which I'm sure we'll dig into again. But we've talked about it a lot recently, and it's still the same, and it's going to be the same for the next few weeks.
We definitely have, and Phil, you've led with this on the newsletter today. We look at Manchester City, and I even think about that first half, barely a shot on target. And I thought something was really interesting that you wrote in the newsletter today, and please explain, because you said saying it's game over for City is risky because they have been the architects of some of the Premier League's best comebacks, but they're fooling nobody. Is it done for City this season, do you reckon?
I'm always wary of the mathematics, and I think there's a certain amount of naivety in saying, City are done at this point because of what has gone on so many times over so many years. But I think you only have to listen to what Sam is saying there, somebody who is really close to this and right on the ground, to feel as if, yeah, they probably are done. And I think they do have those powers of recovery. But I don't think any of us are seeing it in them at this stage. I think there's too much that's wrong. There are too many deficiencies, too many gaps in the squad or weaknesses in the team for them to put together the sort of run that they normally do put together, which somehow rescues all this. I think you can see that in Guardiola's body language. I think you can see it in the body language of some of the players. They look pretty triggered by all this. And that was definitely the case with Guardiola yesterday. The 6-fingered stuff, the way in which he was going on about Anfield singing "You're getting sacked in the morning." It's a pretty traditional part of the game in England, that, isn't it? It goes back years. It's just what happens when managers run into trouble. And with him, you are talking about 6 league defeats on the bounce. So it's not as if he is getting sacked in the morning. But absolute open goal for Anfield to sing that. And it's not as if there isn't any history between him and the crowd there. So it's not going to be this bad forever for City. He will right things and they will get a grip before long. But I strongly suspect that by the time they do, they will probably be if not quite totally out the running for the title. I think they'll be so far back that even Guardiola won't expect a miracle come Easter.
Yeah, Sam, I want to go into Guardiola a little later on, but you wrote after the defeat at Spurs, we needed to forget everything we know about Pep's Manchester City for now. How has it unraveled so quickly? But also back to what Phil was saying, I think from a spectator watching City in that first half, this looked like a team that just did not feel confident in anything they were trying to pull off.
Yeah, it did feel like that. To be fair, I thought in the second half they looked a bit more like it, but we're talking in relative terms because I could only kind of really talk about positives from yesterday in the sense that I had no expectations going into it. And, my expectations at the moment couldn't be lower for City just because of the issues. But yeah, in terms of that first half, you're right, especially around the edge of the box. Like they just kind of like Haaland might lay it off to Rico Lewis, he'd kind of look around, but there wasn't the kind of the usual slick passes. Everyone knows exactly where the other player's going to be, where they need to put the ball, where they need to move afterwards. It was like 2 or 3 passes. What are we doing here? Go out to Kyle Walker. He'd do his big ridiculous step over, which fools nobody. Give it back to Ruben Dias, and then they'd start again. Then they'd lose it in midfield, and Liverpool would get a corner or a shot on goal. How it's kind of come to this so quickly. The injury situation is pretty stark. So obviously they've lost Rodri, which is a huge miss. And basically without Rodri, there's something in there that can't be fixed just by the injured players coming back. So to move away from the injuries quickly, they haven't got legs or mobility in midfield really, or physicality. They haven't got that presence in there because Gundogan is, I don't know how to put it, but he's not the player he was, certainly at the moment. He can't play holding midfield anymore. He doesn't have the legs for it. To the extent that yesterday they tried Bernardo Silva there and Gundogan higher up. And Bernardo Silva, he can maybe drop in as a holding midfielder when Rodri's playing and help the ball come out the back when everything's stable. But you can't, he's not a holding midfielder, like fulcrum player. And again, when everything's stable, it's okay, but it isn't. And Guardiola said after the game, you got Akanji going into midfield. It's fine when he does it next to Rodri or Kovacic, but they're not there. So there's something missing in midfield where even Kovacic, who's not the answer to Rodri, but is the best bet, he's probably like a 7 or 8 out of 10 in terms of what they need from Rodri. But even he's not perfect, but he's not there anyway. And then all the defense has either been injured over the last month or they've been fit, but like run into the ground. So like Guardiola's been kind of run into the ground. This is the issue with Bernardo as well, with Gundogan. I think with Haaland as well, we're seeing all the players who have been fit. There's been no option to rotate them. So you've got this issue. And basically, people are going to say, look, everyone gets injuries, and they do. But I think the best way for me to put it, the way I understand it best, is the reason that City are so good at their best, that people can't really get their head around it. Like, they win 4 in a row, they win the treble. Guardiola's tactics and the players he's got, they marry up perfectly for all of those players to get the ball in like advantageous situations. They're always working, and they control a game and they be patient. So they've got an overload at some point, or they're going to switch the ball to the winger to have a 1v1, but they're only going to do it when the fullback on the other side is sucked in. So then he has to backpedal across. By that time, like Mahrez in the past or Savinho now has taken the ball down. Everything is geared towards getting the players to play to their strengths. Like the system brings all the players to their best form. That's why they kind of score these mechanical type goals where it's a pullback to the far post or whatever it may be. But that system that gets the best out of them, when that's not there, it's like a system failure now. So before, they were like far more than the sum of their parts. Like if you gave those players to like any other club, any other manager, I don't think you're getting 4 in a row. You're not getting a treble. But now that system is kind of, I don't know, it needs debugging basically, and they're way less than the sum of their parts. The quality, the individual quality of those players basically counts for nothing at the moment because they can't play the way that they understand and the way that Guardiola understands, which I suppose brings in another question, but I've talked for long enough, so we might come back to that.
Well, I did want to ask actually, Sam, do you think they've failed to preempt the deterioration of parts of that system? I suppose in effect, backed horses that they should no longer be backing to any great extent. You mentioned Gundogan, who I thought was going to be a real asset for them on a freebie, but actually hadn't been very impressive this season at all. De Bruyne just isn't doing what he used to do, and I thought it was quite notable yesterday that it took the second goal for Guardiola to actually go for De Bruyne as opposed to looking for him to just to salvage things earlier in the game. Yeah, it's just not at that point. And say the same about Kyle Walker. They've obviously been unlucky with injuries, and they definitely have. But do you think they maybe misjudged what needed to be done with this squad in order to keep the system rolling as it needed to?
Well, the biggest thing is injuries, like you say. And again, this is something I've been talking about for a while, even before the defeat set in. Well, there's not many goals in the team, which is mad because even when I was saying this, they were the top scorers in the Premier League. But the best way to highlight the case is yesterday, apart from Haaland, nobody in that City 11 had scored a Premier League goal. Like the wingers, when Guardiola brought on Docio and Savinho, when the game was at 1-0, and there was a chance maybe that City could have got something at that point, even though Liverpool was still having big chances. You think, okay, this is obviously going to add some impetus. But once they get to the box, they're very eye-catching outside the box. Once they get into the box, they don't always create a lot. Obviously, sometimes during their City career, they have done. But at the moment, they're struggling and they just don't score goals. They're not a goal threat. But then you're missing De Bruyne. He's basically been out for 10 weeks. And we're including the last 2 or 3 weeks when he's been on the bench. But as you saw yesterday, Guardiola's not mad. We might not understand it, but he's not mad. De Bruyne would have started that game or come on earlier if he had the capability to do so. Foden's got his own problems that I think we should kind of be mindful of. And so if you lose your 2 big creators in that sense, Foden, the player of the year last year, De Bruyne, goes without saying, as well as Rodri, there's big issues there. All the defenders. But anyway, then yes, and the transfer window. For me, it goes as deep as the injuries are a major problem. But then even with everybody fit, apart from Rodri, who's not coming back, but let's say everyone else comes back fit in the next 2 weeks, they're still going to be lacking in midfield. And then you look at it and you go, well, where are the midfielders you signed in the last 2 years? Some are just gone. They knew they needed somebody to go alongside or instead of Rodri. They wanted Bruno at Newcastle, didn't want to pay the money. So they went, okay, we won't do it now, which is their usual way. They thought, okay, well, Gundogan's coming back. That will help. And I think as long as everybody's fit and firing, it's still a great midfield. It's still a great team. They would not be having these problems. They might have lost a couple of games. They might have dropped a couple of points. They would not be having these problems. But so they decided not to act in the summer, really. And then previously they bought Nunes, and he's the only midfielder actually with legs. He played on the left wing yesterday, which is the only kind of thing which, what I would question Guardiola on tactically means nothing. But if you want a midfielder with legs, he is that, but he's playing on the left wing. And then the one before that was Calvin Phillips. So you can look to the transfer market and say, well, they've spent the best part of 100 million on 2 players to do that role. And they haven't worked out. So for me, the big problem is the injuries. The second problem is the transfer market. But yeah, they don't have that. They don't have the player they need in the squad at the moment, and they're going to have to do something in January.
If City are technically out of it, and I'm getting that's the feeling with the conversation we're having so far, is it Liverpool's now to lose?
I still think it's too early in the season to be saying it's Liverpool's to lose. I think
you sound like Slot. You sound like Van Dijk. You sound like all of them.
The fact that I think there was a stat doing the rounds yesterday, wasn't there, that it's the biggest lead anyone has had after 13 games since I think United were 11 clear in 93, 94, which gives you some idea of what a special situation they find themselves in, beyond their wildest expectations. When I think if you spoken to most Liverpool fans before a ball was kicked in August, there was that nagging fear that not buying a holding midfielder was going to really hold them back, and that probably top 4 and maybe collecting one of the domestic cups would be a really good first season under Slot. But of course, expectations are going through the roof because of what he's overseen so far. I mean, unprecedented, really. 20 games in charge, 18 wins, just that one blip against Forest. The other one they didn't win was a really good point down at Arsenal. So I think what Sunday showed for me is that if Liverpool are going to be reeled in and get and not stay out in front, and I don't think it's going to be City this time around, they need to worry about. I think Arsenal and potentially Chelsea are going to pose more of a threat to that. I think Sam mentions injuries then, and I feel like because Liverpool have done so well, it's kind of gone under the radar a little bit. The injuries they've had. When you think no Alisson, no Jota, Chiesa's barely kicked a ball for Liverpool since he joined. Even in the last week or two, they've lost Tsimikas, Conor Bradley, Kanate out for a while as well with a knee injury. So that's, as well as they've done, I think that is the caveat at the moment, that another couple of injuries could change the dynamic again in the next few weeks. But yeah, I mean, what they've done so far is incredible, because they've had bigger, margins of victory against City. You think in the Klopp era, think of that 3-0 win in the quarterfinal first leg of the Champions League in 2018, but they'd never dominated City like they did on Sunday. They'd never outclassed them in every single department. And and the fact it was only 1-0 at the break was ludicrous, really. And it felt like that first half was almost like a kind of tribute to the Klopp era in the way in which they absolutely flew at City. And then we saw the other side to this slot, Liverpool in the second. They effectively let City have the ball and said, all right, then go on and you try and break us down. And City barely laid a glove on Liverpool. The fact that Kelleher didn't have a proper save to make until the game was already done, and even then it only came because Van Dijk had a blip on what was. I thought he was absolutely immense. Apart from that, so yeah, they'll take a huge amount of belief from that, because City have been the benchmark for so long.
Well, next we'll go deeper into City's struggles and try to figure out how Guardiola can fix things. Well, Sunday's defeat at Anfield makes it 6 defeats in 7 games without a win for Pep Guardiola's Manchester City. And Sam, Opta have released their season's simulation, and it basically shows Manchester City's chances of winning the Premier League, 4.3%. Manchester City's chances of finishing 5th, 4.6%. Manchester City have a higher chance of finishing outside the top 4 than they do of winning the Premier League. Look, we've spoken, a few weeks ago, or I think it was last week, about, Pep Guardiola's contract renewal. But I wonder if we've kind of underestimated just how big this rebuild actually is looking to be.
First of all, those things are pretty stupid, aren't they? They're the same things.
You would say that, though.
no, but they are. Like you get them in, like, during the Euros or something, and it's like Spain are 2-0 up against Romania. It's like Spain have got an 80% chance of winning this game. So yeah, obviously they have. Like, we don't need the computer to tell us what we can see with our eyes.
All right, Sam. Okay, I'll take it, but no.
But I mean,
I'm also very anti-supercomputer if it's any help.
All right,
yeah. What was it? I think, was there like a supercomputer email that went around yesterday, and it was like, we predict City to finish 10 points behind Liverpool. It's like, well, that'd be fantastic. Like, that'd be a great outcome at this point. Because
it's as reliable as an octopus picking the winner of the Euros of the World Cup. Is where we're at right now.
But I mean, I don't dispute, like, if it carries on. This is the thing, like, they just take into account what's happening now. So whether it's in a match or whether it's in a season. So I don't know if they're saying there's like 4% chance of City finishing 5th because they're going to finish in the top 4, or because they think they're going to finish lower. But yeah, if you look at it right now, of course they're not going to finish 5th. Of course they're not going to finish in the top 4. But it doesn't take into account what can change in a match or in a season. And I don't know when City are going to turn the form around. This was what I was saying to James and others before the game. I was like, well, if they somehow beat Liverpool, are they going to beat Forest or Palace in the next 2 games? I don't think so. Then they got Juventus, then they've got United, and then they got Villa. Where are they winning in these matches if it carries on like this? So if you're asking me or a computer how it's going to go at the end of the season, it's not looking good. But we've got to kind of presume that it cannot carry on like this forever. And as long as there are injured players coming back, it's going to be more stable. It might be like October levels of stability where they just about beat Fulham, they just about beat Wolves, but it's more or less there. It looks like City compared to this now, which doesn't. In terms of where it goes from here, I mentioned earlier, like, buying a player in January just to give them that kind of presence. I mean, how many players hit the ground running when they join City? Yeah. And they're going to need to. Like, there's no point in buying a player in January if they're going to settle in the summer. Obviously, long term, that's great. But if they don't settle in until the summer or next season, then it's not going to help them now. But this is it. Like, I don't know. But part of the issue is, Guardiola was like, okay, well, we need stability. I think he would have used, his answer to that in midfield. And it's not. This goes to show these solutions aren't ideal, but it's something. He would have used Akanji as the holding midfielder because he's physical. He's quick enough, isn't he? Like, is he as good on the ball as Rodri? No. I mean, when he was going into midfield last year instead of Stones, it was like, he looks way more like mechanical and clunky than Stones does. But again, Stones, he came back from injury, went off against Spurs at halftime last week. I don't think we'll be seeing him for a while. So even the ability to put Akanji in midfield is hampered because, like, Diaz hasn't been there, Ake's not been there. Akanji was playing when he was not fit, then he got injured, then he came back, still not fit. These are the kind of recurring issues, and it's like I was speaking to somebody last night who's from the Middle East, and he was like, they'll be right after the winter break, won't they? And I was like, mate, like, there isn't one. There isn't one.
Yeah,
It's like they just need to
yeah.
forfeit two Premier. They'd be better off forfeiting two Premier League games, like going to Saudi Arabia for like some warm weather training and coming back with fresh minds, like that, rather than just running themselves into the ground. I don't know, because if the answer is like Nunes in midfield because he's got more legs, I mean that's how far the standards have dropped temporarily. Nunes isn't as good as the other midfielders, but in terms of the effort and the kind of energy, he might be what they need. Akanji is not a good central midfielder. He's a very good player. He's not a great central midfielder, but those two might be the answer to like stability and physicality. But where's that going to get them? A bit more stable than they are now. If you've say got Ake and Diaz as proper centre backs behind them, Walker if he can stop making mistakes for 5 minutes. And then Guardiola left back, even he's had problems in the last couple of games. So honestly, I don't know. I've got no doubt that things will get better, and that beyond this season, or even beyond, into next year, things will be all right. If they can kind of stabilise, they can win the Champions League. Obviously, not playing like they are now. The supercomputer is not going to give you that, but maybe they could if they sort it out. But even if not, I'm sure they'll be fine next year. But I don't know short term where that turnaround's actually happening.
James, I feel Sam's quite triggered by the word supercomputer, so I'm going to move on to you very quickly. But in reality, do you see any similarities to, a point in which it looked like Jurgen Klopp's powers were declining at Liverpool in comparison to what we're seeing here at Manchester City? Aging personnel, perhaps, an inability to rally the troops, as to say, in the same way as you have previously, and create really overwhelming dominant performances, perhaps?
Yeah, I think there definitely are clear parallels with Liverpool in 2022-23, because if you think back to then, I think Klopp said himself that they as a club as well massively misjudged what that group of players had left in the tank. Liverpool had played, I think it was 63 games in all competitions in 21-22, had gone the distance in the Premier League, obviously pipped to the title by City. They got to the Champions League final, lost that to Real Madrid. And then, especially in that midfield area, I mean, that was what was glaring for me on Sunday. I've never seen Liverpool dominate City in that department so emphatically. And also just looking at that City midfield, and there was just no fear factor whatsoever in terms of, well, who's going to deny you here? Who is really going to stop? Gravenberch, who's been in the form of his life. Who's gonna stop him? Who's gonna stop McAllister and Szoboszlai? And who can come close to Szoboszlai in terms of the athleticism and the energy that he's impacting on that game? And they didn't have any answers. And of course, Liverpool in 22-23, it was Jordan Henderson and Fabinho whose form absolutely fell off a cliff. And then, I think they brought in Arthur Melo on loan at the start of that season. That was the only thing they did in terms of strengthening midfield, and caused Melo.
He barely played at all for Liverpool.
Exactly, just one of the most disastrous signings in Liverpool's recent history. And it cost them big time. And there was, when you look at Guardiola at the minute, I think he does look, from my perspective, like almost, he has no way of stemming the tide of what he's seeing game after game at the minute. And there was a period like that for Klopp. Klopp looked utterly bereft I think it was a 3-0 defeat at Brighton in, must have been January or February of that 22-23 season. And he almost like put his hands together as if he was begging for forgiveness in front of the away end after, because it was around that time Liverpool, they lost 3-0 at Wolves as well, when Wolves were right down the bottom. And the wheels properly came off. And I think, we are seeing that with City at the minute, with, good players who have completely lost their way, but also, that misjudgment of what players in the twilight of their career have got left to offer.
Yeah, Phil, I want to go back to what we were talking about at the top. You alluded to it, this whole idea of Liverpool fans chanting, you're getting sacked in the morning. Look, Guardiola responded after the game saying he had expected more respect from the Liverpool crowd. You've sort of given us your take on that, but should the crowd have had a bit more respect? I mean, this is also a guy that's reshaped English football. No?
Yeah, but I mean that's the game, isn't it? And that's the sport, and this is the way it's played and the way it's always been. It's just a completely alien situation for Guardiola anywhere in his career, to be in a situation where things are this out of control. It wasn't that he was taking the title every single season at Barcelona. It wasn't like he was taking the Champions League religiously at Bayern Munich, and he had to spend time settling in at City as well. But he's used to being top of the tree, and it seems to me that he's finding that very difficult to cope with, the reality of not being at the top of the tree. And I can totally understand why. I sympathise on that front as well. I think the advantage for Guardiola, and the same is true of Klopp, is that the amount of credit you have in the bank is what determines how much time you can afford to take to sort things out. And City will have to put up with over the next few weeks, until things do turn a corner completely. They'll have to put up with the kind of criticism and the taunts that come, which inevitably will. But people, the club especially, will say, look, Guardiola needs as long as it takes to get a grip of this. He's just signed a new contract. I think from here, they really are going to have to think about getting it together for next season. There is, as Sam said, the Champions League. But it's not as if he's in any actual trouble. And I think everybody at City will be quite philosophical in saying that there are things to be sorted out, and that there are ways in which they've been exposed with the structure of the squad. I mean, I have to say, in the summer, I understood the reasons for Alvarez going from City, but I didn't think he was a player they could afford to lose, and I didn't think they could afford to lose his goals. In saying that, I'm not suggesting that you put Alvarez back in this squad and it's a silver bullet for what's going on. The problem is in midfield, without a doubt. And, I find it hard to imagine that in January, City are going to be able to find or to prize out of another club the sort of midfielder that they need. And you see with Calvin Phillips, Sam referenced him, just how good you have to be to even cope at all at City. You need to be of the top standard, which is basically Rodri and a few others. And I think what this has shown to City is they do need to face facts about Rodri. They need somebody who is basically his equivalent. I know that's difficult. I know it's hideously expensive. But if he is so integral to your system, and he quite clearly is, then you have to have a ready-made alternative to him. Otherwise, anytime you lose him for a sustained period, as with this season, you're going to be in trouble. And that's where they are.
Yeah. I was just thinking, Sam, about, Klopp asking for forgiveness from the Anfield, massive. And, in terms of Guardiola, maybe he's sort of humbly understanding that there's no way out of this, that, that quote about him saying, the reset starts now kind of thing, is that, what, we've been a shambles, just bear with us for this time being, because I don't even know how you manage the situation for a group of fans that in recent history, they've only ever really been at the top of the tree.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting dynamic with City fans, isn't it? Because most of the City fans, a large part of the match-going fans anyway, have been used to far worse than this. So that's not an issue so much. I think even the younger guys are like, well, it's almost like it's a period just to kind of sit down and go, this is how good we were. Even if it feels like all this stuff is end of an era kind of talk. So. In terms of the fans getting used to it, I don't know. I feel like everyone's got different axes to grind. Whether it's individuals, whether it's transfer market, whether it's Guardiola. Obviously, everyone's kind of pointing fingers at times like this. Yeah, I don't think Guardiola's going to do this, the kind of bear with us situation, but I think he knows. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if he knew yesterday they were going to get beat, but he's picked a team to go with. Whether it's damage limitation or, well, we're going to do as much as we can. Like turning Liverpool around and making them attack the Kop in the first half it's always, these kind of things are always seen as like mind games or whatever. And I think
has that ever worked anywhere in the history of football? People used to do it with Leeds all the time. Used to play towards the Kop. It never made any difference. I mean, if it did make a difference, there was no science to it at all.
Yeah.
No, but like everyone always sees it as like mind games. But I just genuinely think it was like, they're trying to get, and I suppose it's kind of potato, but any kind of small advantage you can get in that situation when you're going into a game with a fragile team, which is not set up in any, Bernardo Silva and Akanji as the midfielders. Gundogan has to do the running that he's not been able to do. Foden with the problems that he's had this season. This kind of stuff. You're just trying to do anything you can. I think Guardiola knows the situation they're in. He might not publicly say, look, just bear with us while we sort this out. But it's fundamentally the same thing. Like Liverpool's injuries this season, they've obviously done well coping with those. And I know Slot's talked about those. But obviously there have been times when, Van Dijk was injured, Salah was injured. And it was like that unprecedented run in the COVID season, wasn't it? When they were just, they couldn't do anything. It's the same kind of thing we're talking about now. What's happened to this relentless Liverpool team? Where are they kind of thing? And they went and regrouped and came back. I think fundamentally all the City fans know or believe that everything will be all right. But a bit like me at the moment, it's like I do believe that just from having seen them and even seeing how they're playing now. I just don't know when exactly that's going to be. But I think most fans have got patience because, like I say, most of them have been through far worse than this when they were in, second division and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we've dealt with Manchester City. Next, let's get into Liverpool. Can anyone catch Arne Slot's Reds? Yeah, I mean, Phil, from an outsider's perspective, how do you react to what Arne Slot has done so far at Liverpool? 11 wins from 13 in the Premier League, 18 wins from 20 in all competitions, 7 wins in a row since they last dropped points, and that was against Arsenal. I mean, the numbers for a new manager are pretty impressive.
Oh, they are. Yeah, massively impressive. I feel quite bad, actually, that up to this point on the podcast we've spoken so much about City rather than Liverpool. But I think it's so unusual to see City this rattled. And also it's happened in such a short period of time that it's created quite a lot of shock. I mean, I think it has to be said that the inheritance that Slot had from Jurgen Klopp was really good. It didn't seem to me to be comparable to, say, when Sir Alex Ferguson retired at Manchester United. And that really was a squad that was at the end of the road and hasn't ever really found the start of a new one since. It was a good squad under Klopp. But even so, it's a seriously difficult job at Liverpool. I mean, I always say it's so much easier to make a mess of that job than it is to make a good go of it. And I think what surprises me most about Slot is that he probably had scope this season to come in and okay, it might still go like this, but decent run in the Champions League, finish top 3, and for people to say, okay, well, that's a nice platform for him, because I got the impression that, and James can contradict me on this, but there was a fair amount of acceptance over at Liverpool that this might be quite transitional this year. Moving from Klopp to Slot might require that kind of classic amount of patience for him to bed in, and that it was probably wrong to expect too much of him. But he seems to have found the sweet spot between good attacking productivity and very, very high defensive levels. And I did think that their work out of possession, and I think he referenced this after the game. He was saying it was perfect. It was so good yesterday. I mean, very rare to see City constrained in the way that they are. And it's not as if when you watch Liverpool time and time again, you're thinking this is a kind of of its generation, this is an outstanding team. But they're incredibly good. And I think what's happened over the past 3-4 months at Anfield speaks so highly of Slot's coaching, his coaching and his man management, to step into that club after somebody like Klopp and to acclimatise as quickly as he has, and I think more than anything to transmit the way he wants to play in a way that the players have clearly understood. It's been superb. And just one final thought on Klopp. He's obviously extremely well thought of at Anfield, but you did get the feeling last season that a few of the players and maybe parts of the crowd were, if not tired of him, were kind of wondering whether it would be a good thing if he moved on before familiarity became contempt, if you know what I mean, in the way that it did, say, with Wenger down at Arsenal. And it just feels to me like it's been, to this point, it's been like the ideal step for Liverpool. They've got the sort of coach they need. They've got a bit of a fresh start, and it's working exceptionally well.
Yeah, James, of course, I'm always pulling your leg about whether or not Liverpool are the major title contenders this season. I mean, stats-wise, we can obviously potentially say yes, but, I've never played football at the highest level, but I always wonder if this is almost like, when you play like an amateur game and you're beaten top of the league, and what feeling that gives you. And of course, Liverpool, of course, Manchester City aren't top of the league at the moment. For every single person in the Premier League, they are still the team to beat, to get a sense that you've progressed. But also most teams would love to emulate that kind of success. But I mean, look at Liverpool. European champions beaten in Real Madrid, the former Premier League winners beaten already. That has got to fill you with something.
Yeah, it has to. Yeah, and I think it's not just the results; it's the manner of them. I think you look at the stats from midweek against Real Madrid. Madrid didn't have a shot on target until stoppage time. City didn't have a shot on target on Sunday until it was 2-0 and the game was effectively already over. So the balance that Slot has struck tactically between kind of protection and being solid, but gambling at the right times, committing players forward at the right times, and that commitment to taking games by the scruff of the neck as well. That balance has been just about perfect and we saw that on Sunday with the way that they they flew at City, absolutely swarmed all over them in the first half. And then it was like, okay, now second half, it was a really different approach for 20, 30 minutes, but they still had the better chances because of the threat they pose on the counter-attack. And when you speak to the players about working with Slot, they just found him an absolute breath of fresh air in terms of his attention to detail. They have more meetings now than they ever have done in terms of team meetings, but also individual ones. He's so hot on, the use of the analysis, picking out what has gone well, what hasn't gone so well. He's a really good communicator. I think that's the other thing that strikes me about him is, he is the clarity in which he delivers things is impressive, and also the players like he's straight talking. He's very kind of Dutch in terms of matter of fact, straight to the point. They know exactly where they stand with him, and yeah, he's just had this kind of Midas touch so far. Even the way he's juggled his resources during a period where he has had injuries. He brings Gakpo back into the team. On Sunday, Gakpo scores, the opening. It brings Szoboszlai back into the team. Szoboszlai has arguably his best performance of the season, and he's done that repeatedly in terms of substitutions as well. The way in which they've positively impacted matches. So it's and amidst all that, he's also this real calm, measured presence where probably he was the only one not getting carried away inside Anfield from a Liverpool perspective on Sunday afternoon, because within a minute of the final whistle he's already talking about rest, recovery, and getting ready for Newcastle away on Wednesday night.
Even so though, he looks as though he's managing for pleasure at the moment. You really see that in him, and I don't doubt that there will be a difficult period for Liverpool ahead, and there'll be a period where, as the Premier League does to everybody, Slot starts to look stressed and starts to look uncomfortable. But at the moment, there's such a massive contrast between him and Guardiola when it comes to body language. He looks, I say this all the time when we talk about Liverpool, but Slot and Liverpool look like they're having fun this season, which is not often what you say about teams in the Premier League.
I think it's spot on there, Phil. And Sam, I think the contrast between Klopp and Slot is, we mentioned this idea of a calmness. He's actually given Liverpool an assuredness and a calmness in a way that perhaps we didn't see with Jurgen Klopp. Some games were just spikily amazing. Some games were just semi-calm. They seem really resilient in a way that I guess we could also say that Manchester City have over the last few years.
Yeah, but in terms of just the comparison between Klopp and Slot, it's almost like it's almost like we're arguing that they're better now than they were under Klopp, and like they're just two great teams in different ways. If you look back to what Klopp did in terms of what he means for the club and to put the club back up into the conversations they're in, going for the Champions League, winning the title, obviously. Like if we talk about like the spikiness and the craziness, or like the more controlled nature now, it wasn't like they weren't this Kevin Keegan side where there was like, well, they'd score 3, but they might let in 4. They were still ripping teams apart, and there was how many seasons was it now when they were just a point behind City? I'm losing track. It was 2 or 3 when something goes slightly different in a City game. And we wouldn't be kind of like everyone gives Klopp his flowers, don't they? But like we wouldn't even be talking about they didn't have this before. They were just two great teams in different ways. Obviously, this Liverpool team need to kind of deliver on it and win something. But the way they're going, they look every bit as formidable as Klopp's team, just in a slightly different way. But I don't think it's any better or worse.
I think it's just because of how difficult that is to follow. Because they were so good under Klopp, that to follow him with a style that isn't identical and to make it work and to make it work in a way which is kind of like borderline as impressive, albeit like pretty small sample size at the moment and better judged at the end of the season, it's quite a feather in Slot's cap, I think, because that was, like I say, it was a good squad to take on, but it was proper big shoes to fill.
Massive. Let's finish on this, James. I know you've spoken to Mo Salah, which has gone viral in the last few weeks in terms of whether or not it was going to stay on at Liverpool. Did he stop for a chat this time around?
No, he didn't, surprisingly. No, he didn't. Only saw Virgil van Dijk this week in the mix zone. No, Salah must have swerved us. He went round the other way to the players' lounge.
Oh, fair enough. But
he said to Sky though, didn't he? He said this is going to be my last game against City, so he's doubling down.
But he kind of pulled himself back a little bit. I think he either let the rabbit out of a hat or he didn't mean to say that at all. Anyway, we'll leave it there. James,
I'm sure
appreciate your time. James, Sam, and Phil, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for listening, everyone, and we'll be back tomorrow. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.